You know the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, today that's exactly what we're doing. Back in the day, Goosebumps ruled the schoolyard, and a huge reason for that was the artwork. Spooky houses, werewolves, mud monsters, those covers both captivated and terrified my tiny little mind. Now Tim Jacobus is a fantastic artist, and honestly, I wouldn't call any of these covers bad, but some of them just grabbed me more than others, and that's what makes this list so much fun. So join me as I rank and revisit all 62 classic Goosebumps covers, from my least favorite to my absolute favorite. Starting off this list, we've got My Hairiest Adventure. Even as a kid, I thought this one was kind of lame. There's just nothing spooky about a boy whose hair won't stop growing. Honestly, he reminds me more of that kid turning into a monkey in Jumanji than anything scary. On the original release of the book, Tim Jacobus' signature and even a towel on the sink were partly covered by Goosebumps' iconic slime border. Not that any of us young readers ever noticed or cared at the time. Jacobus used what I assume was a relative as the model for the character, and one of the early sketches even shows the kid with what looks like a paw. If that's in the book itself, I definitely don't remember. The international covers are also worth mentioning. The UK version shows a kid climbing out of slime while holding the Instatan bottle. And you'll notice a pattern with the UK releases as we go along. It's almost always someone or something emerging from some kind of goo. Later in the series, they got even lazier, just plopping Jacobus' original art in the middle instead of coming up with something unique. France, on the other hand, usually adds several variations. Here, instead of just being hairy, the kid actually looks like he's transforming into a cat or some kind of animal. Either that or the French accidentally mixed up Goosebumps with Animorphs. The art does technically fit the Goosebumps formula of playful horror aimed at younger readers, but personally I always felt adults underestimated just how weird and visceral kids' imaginations really are. Well, weird kids like me anyways. My Best Friend is Invisible is another really silly cover. Nothing about it really evokes spooky vibes, but it does feel like a cartoon. The overreaction of the cat watching as this invisible person eats pizza is funny, but not something I really want to see in my Goosebumps books. Some of the initial sketches are kind of interesting. I think I actually prefer the fact you can see the floating clothing in the sketches as opposed to the person being completely invisible in the final product. I always thought if someone could go invisible, that wouldn't necessarily mean their clothes would too. The UK release, like I mentioned in the previous entry, is just the artwork coming out of the slime. They didn't do anything interesting with it, and from here on out, unless they do something really interesting, I'm not bringing them up. The Icelandic version is kinda simplistic, but it at least does show a hat, so you know there's a person there. Or is there a person there? Because spoilers, but the Korean cover literally gives away what this person looks like. I don't know what the hell this thing is, but it looks to be part goat, part squid, part human? It looks like something that crawled out of the pages of H.P. Lovecraft more than it does Goosebumps. Honestly, I wish they had just gone with this cover because it's so damn weird and awesome. How I Learned to Fly is another one of those covers. As kids, I'm sure we all dreamed about being able to fly, but I'm not sure how that really translates to horror. I do like the touch of angry seagulls chasing after him though, and giving the birds the same color scheme as the kids' Converse shoes is pretty clever. Speaking of which, those sneakers are kind of a running gag in Tim Jacobus' art. They pop up in a bunch of different covers throughout the series. One of the early sketches had the kid flying from behind, but I think the final composition is definitely more interesting. Still, there's not a whole lot to this one. It's a nice illustration, but it feels more suited to a children's fantasy book than something meant to be scary. And as for the international releases, nothing especially interesting this time, so moving on. Chicken Chicken has one of the strangest covers in the whole series. You've got a young girl transforming into a chicken sprinting away from a chicken coop. Very weird stuff. At least the storm clouds in the background try to add a bit of spookiness. Jacobus once again used a model as his reference here, and it's funny to think that this girl, immortalized mid-chicken mutation, probably grew up, got a job, and has a retirement fund now. The original sketches show some alternate poses, but the real gem is the color mock-up. It looks so goofy I actually laughed out loud the first time I saw it. There's also a neat bit of trivia. The final cover was accidentally printed flipped, which meant Jacobus' signature ended up backwards. Not that many readers noticed, but it was finally corrected in the 2007 reprint. Outside of that little mix-up, there's not much else to say here. Although, do you think the WWE could sue for gimmick infringement? The scariest thing about the Go Eat Worms cover isn't the worms, it's the math homework. 478 divided by 6? Nobody can do that. The actual art shows worms bursting out of a notebook, which should be gross, but my main issue is they all look dried out. Honestly, they look more like gummy worms. If Jacobus had made them all slimy and wet, the cover would have been 10 times more effective. Even R.L. Stine has said this is one of his least favorite Goosebumps stories, and if the author doesn't like the book, that doesn't give the artist much to work with. Jacobus has even admitted that if he could redo it, he'd add one giant monstrous worm erupting from the center to give it more impact. Unfortunately, we're just left with a lot of dry worms. The original sketches don't help much either. They're just more worms coming out of more books. Not exactly an improvement. The UK version swaps in a toy bird coughing up worms, and at least they actually look like real worms. But the best variant is easily the French edition, which shows a young girl about to bite into a burger bursting with worms. It's simple, it's gross, and it's way more effective than the original. Monster Blood 4 gives some really cartoony looking slug monsters. Honestly, I'm not sure what Jacobus was going for here, but the style almost feels like concept art for Monsters Inc., years before Pixar actually made it. The weirdest thing about these creatures has to be the giant human looking lips. I don't know much about slugs, but I'm pretty sure they don't usually look like they're about to pucker up. The bright colors and warped shapes do make the cover fun, but it never really had that spooky edge that made me want to grab it off the shelf. The original sketches are interesting though, and the slugs look way more friendly, almost like goofy pets. By the final version though, they're morphed into these slimy creeps that look like they're about to mug you in an alley. This was actually the final book in the original Goosebumps run, and it's one of only a handful that never got a reprint. Unfortunately, there aren't any fun international covers to talk about either, so next. Legend of the Lost Legend. Quite the mouthful of a title, but do Vikings really fit in with Goosebumps? The cover gives us a stalking Viking woman guarding treasure in snowy woods, and honestly, it doesn't scream horror to me, more like Dungeons & Dragons Junior Edition. That said, her Cabbage Patch Chucky hybrid face is kinda unsettling, but overall the vibe leans way more fantasy than fright. The artwork itself is solid, the icy blues and purples help add a little chill, but it feels like a cover from another book series entirely. The original sketches show Jacobus experimenting, and at one point the Viking lady looked suspiciously like Humpty Dumpty in armor, which would have been something. Luckily, the international editions are at least a little different. The French version swaps in a creepy old man carrying a box through the woods, which I think fits the Goosebumps tone a lot better. I even prefer their title, Threat of the Forest. Later reprints though went the opposite direction. Watered down, simpler artwork, and slapped with a big Disney sticker. Hard to be spooky when Mickey Mouse is smiling at you from the corner. Why I'm Afraid of Bees, though honestly, I'm not, that's just the title. The cover gives us another classic scenario, a kid turning into a creature, this time a bee. And yes, he's got a haircut you could set your watch to. In the book, the kid doesn't literally transform, his mind is swapped with a bee. But the cover is more visually interesting than simply slapping a bee on the front, which some of Jacobus's early sketches suggested was the original plan. The final design even feels a bit reminiscent of the 1958 film Return of the Fly. Whether that was intentional, I have no idea. The UK edition goes full goofy, featuring a bee with a child's head sticking its tongue out. Honestly, it looks completely derpy. France did 3 versions, one with a boy emerging from a honeycomb face to face with a bee, another with a bee landing on a child's face, and a more recent one showing a boy surrounded by a swarm. Out of all of these, I still think the original cover is the strongest. It's visually striking and does the best job of capturing that classic Goosebumps vibe. Monster Blood 3 has a similar issue to How I Learned to Fly. Sure, we all dreamed of being a giant at some point, but is that really scary? For anyone standing nearby, maybe. Getting squished would definitely be terrifying, but for the kid that's suddenly towering over everyone else, not so much. Jacobus's trademark Converse shoes make another appearance here, drawn using reference photos of his own feet. It's a fun little signature that pops out throughout the series. The artwork itself is solid. The monster blood puddles on the ground, the child walking through the playground. It's visually interesting, but it still doesn't scream horror. The UK version leans a bit more into the grotesque side, showing the green bubbling monster blood with 2 monstrous eyes front and center, which definitely adds a little more menace. Not the scariest cover in the series, but maybe the next one will be a real winner? Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes is a lot like Legend of the Lost Legend. I see gnomes more as fantastical creatures than something that really belongs in horror. The artwork itself is very well done. I like how Jacobus makes the crystal ball in the center almost shimmer. Fun fact, when he first submitted the art, the gnome on the left was picking his nose. Scholastic's editors immediately said no. You can have an executioner carrying an axe, but nose picking? Absolutely forbidden. The international covers shake things up a bit. The Spanish edition shows a young boy being accosted by a couple gnomes. The South Korean version is much more interesting. The gnomes appear to be covered in blood, or maybe it's just dirt, but the reddish-brown splatters are arranged in a way that could pass for blood in a kid's book. Their title is even better, Two-Faced Dwarf Goblin? Honestly, I'd much rather pick up Two-Faced Dwarf Goblin than Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes. Yes, it's every Redditor's favorite book, I Live in Your Basement. The cover features this weird, blobby, veiny looking thing that's obviously very hungry. Probably after posting some of the worst takes online. If only there were some Hot Pockets nearby, the image would be complete. Jacobus is no stranger to blobby monsters, but this one is apparently named Kevin. It's always fun when basement-dwelling blobs get proper names. The original sketches aren't too far off from the finished cover, keeping the same creepy vibe. Along with Monster Blood 4, this is one of only a handful of original Goosebumps books that never got a reprint. The international covers shake things up again. The French cover features a large, toothy monster peering up the stairs, a bit more menacing than the original, but my personal favorite might be the Danish version. Instead of a cartoonish monster, it looks like a potential serial killer about to go on a rampage. Definitely unnerving in a way the original never quite managed. I've never really associated comic book characters with horror. Sure, they can be horror adjacent, but your average caped superhero just doesn't come off as scary. Even as a kid, Attack of the Mutant never really grabbed me. The artwork itself is solid and works in a comic book sense, but it doesn't scream terror. The Masked Mutant looks more like a knockoff of Batman than anything truly frightening. Even one of Jacobus' early sketches show the mutant silhouetted against a lightning strike, which kinda reminds me of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. The international editions, though, are something else entirely. The UK cover, I honestly have no idea what's going on. Is he trying to fly? Grab the reader? And what's with that goofy bicycle helmet? Then there's the French edition, which takes it to a whole new level. This mutant looks like a bizarre mashup of Superman, Spider-Man, and maybe the Flash, but in the frailest, most terrified way possible. You can practically hear him saying, "Oh, please don't touch me, oh boy." Instead of fear, this cover elicits mockery and laughter. You know the old saying, egg monsters are from Mars, omelets are from Venus, or something like that. Egg Monsters from Mars is a fun one, featuring a yolky looking monster oozing out of an egg. It's a little gross, though when I buy eggs, I usually make sure there aren't any massive veiny green ones in the carton. This cover is actually one of Jacobus' favorites because it let him take something every day and make it spooky. R.L. Stine has claimed this was his favorite story to write, not because it was particularly interesting, but simply because it mostly takes place in just 2 scenes. Easy peasy. The French edition goes even weirder, showing a man who vaguely resembles Doc Brown from Back to the Future being swarmed by evil caviar. It's an interesting twist, but I much prefer the playful nature of the original. The Beast from the East goes interplanetary with, well, some kind of gorilla, koala, hamster hybrid monster. I honestly don't know what this thing is, but the cover always stood out to me because it feels completely alien. Everything is familiar, but also not. It almost has a Tim Burton-esque vibe to it. Some of the early sketches made the monster look much more huggable, like a stuffed animal you'd want to snuggle after a long nap. However, the French edition, not so much. With its elongated head and neck, razor-sharp claws, piercing fangs, it looks ready to rip your head off. Definitely a far cry from Jacobus' original and more cuddly hamster gorilla design. Next up, Beware the Snowman. Honestly, this monster feels like it would be pretty easy to defeat. Just grab a small space heater and watch him melt away. But what could make a snowman go rogue like this? Did the kids use some yellow snow to build him up? The snowman itself looks great, from his angry expression to his little twig arms, which I can only imagine he's violently raising while shouting, "I'll get you!" The darkened background and frozen mailbox help sell the wintry vibe, though a gust of wind might have added a bit more harshness to the scene. The early sketches are fun too. I particularly like the one where his expression shows the kids just managed to escape his grasp. Again. The French return with a cover of their own, featuring an army of snowmen, though the nose on this one looks, a little phallic. The Danish cover is sketchy but charming, and the South Korean version is fantastic. It really captures the creepy evil snowman, while giving the wintry setting more depth than the original. Still, I have to say it, an evil snowman? Not exactly a terrifying threat, but a fun cover. Calling All Creeps is one that always grabbed my attention, mainly because why are the creeps velociraptors? I was obsessed with dinosaurs in the mid-90s like most kids, so this cover immediately drew me in. I even had a purple basketball with the Toronto Raptors logo on it, and I don't even like basketball. I did kill that horse though. The cover itself is great. Reptilian monsters dressed as humans using a phone booth. It's a really intriguing composition, and sadly these days, the phone booth is probably just as extinct as the dinosaurs in this image. The French edition takes a goofier approach though. One of the creeps looks like he's doing the classic 90s "What's Up Budweiser" ad. Clearly a coincidence that both came out the same year, but it's amusing nonetheless. Still, I think the original cover is far more interesting. Monster Blood 2 has a really fun cover featuring a giant, very angry looking hamster bursting from its cage after ingesting some monster blood. There's a cool effect with the warping of the surroundings that draws your eye straight to the hamster. A neat little touch. The hamster itself is fantastic, and apparently Jacobus' favorite part of the piece was trying to make it look evil. But aren't hamsters already evil? The UK edition shows a hamster emerging from slime looking suitably pissed off. The Dutch version goes even bigger, with a massive hamster paw smashing through a classroom door. And the French cover? It features a kid about to be eaten by a giant hamster, which might be my personal favorite of the bunch. Still, I do have a soft spot for the original. Werewolf Skin is one of the few Goosebumps books I don't think I actually owned. By the time it came out, I had already moved on to more graphic stuff like the Dark Horse Alien and Predator comics. The art itself is pretty fun though. A simple werewolf costume in a box, which cleverly plays on the title. After all, a Halloween costume could become a second skin on Halloween. I'm also assuming this story involves actual werewolves. In the background, there's a nice little picture on the wall of a winged demonic figure, a subtle touch that I really like. I also like the wolves banner on the wall too. Since this was one of the last books in the original run, Werewolf Skin hasn't received a modern reprint. It does have a French edition though, featuring a more realistic werewolf compared to the original's cartoony version. My personal favorite though is the Dutch cover, a young boy looking out his window at his neighbor's house where the silhouette of a werewolf is visible inside. It feels like a nod to Hitchcock's Rear Window or the classic vampire film Fright Night. While the original cover is fun, I think this Dutch one takes the crown. Bad Hair Day continues the trend of monstrous animals featured throughout Goosebumps. In this one, we have an evil rabbit popping out of a magician's hat. It's very distorted and deformed, which gives it a sort of cartoon-like appearance. I love the creepy eyes Jacobus often gives his monsters. There's just something about them that add to the creepiness of it all. Based off all the stink lines though, I'd say this rabbit is due for a good bath. Apparently R.L. Stine's original title for the book was "The Hand is Quicker Than the Awl," which doesn't really make much sense to me. The French once again have their own take on the cover, and I don't know why, but this one just makes me laugh. The rabbit just looks both silly and menacing with those giant red bug eyes popping out of its skull. But if I had to choose, I'd probably pick the more over-the-top and cartoonish style of the original. Night of the Living Dummy 3 brings everyone's favorite ventriloquist dummy back to the forefront with a whole slew of new evil dummies. Evil dummies are already a fun, creepy concept, but having more than one instantly makes it even better. What I like is the assortment, from this goofy one with the giant ears, to a lady dummy, and this poor sap who looks like a pizza delivery boy. What I noticed right away is how the lines in the floorboards and ceiling draw your eye into the dummies. You can look at the image without focusing your eyes, and you'll still pick up on that sweeping motion that leads right to the dummies. Tim Jacobus claimed this was one of his favorite covers to do because he got to do so many different and unique dummies outside of just Slappy. He even tried a bunch of different sketches with Slappy in the kitchen, Slappy and friends up close, and what basically led to the final product. There's an updated version as part of the classic Goosebumps line, but I don't really like this version at all. It's cleaner looking, sure, but it's missing a bit of the personality of the original. The Headless Ghost is a fun, spooky cover, featuring, as the title suggests, a ghost carrying their own head. I love the spooky transparency of the ghost and how everything is lit up orange by the glow of a single candle on the wall. This has me wondering though, did the ghost light that candle? And if he did, does this mean the ghost replaces the candles? Does he head down to the local market and pick up a 10-pack when they all run out? I also really like the cobwebs and light blue and purple that helps bring out the spookiness. Some of Jacobus' early designs has the head with a more anguished look on its face, and I like how the model Jacobus used was carrying a jack-o'-lantern as reference. Actually, if the ghost itself was carrying a lit jack-o'-lantern, I think that would have been an improvement. There's an updated reprint that has the ghost surfing down the stair railing, which is a little head-scratching. The French have a great cover with a skeletal hand holding up a decapitated head, because if anyone knows anything about decapitations, it's the French. The Dutch release is much different, as the story is actually called The Horror House and has more focus on the house than the people trying to escape it. And I like these spooky eyes glowing in the dark right here. There's an interesting Persian release with a head laying down on a paper or something. It's hard to make out what it's supposed to be. Japan, which only had a handful of Goosebumps releases, comes in with an amazing one of their own, which features a very ghoulish looking pirate ghost carrying a head or mask of some kind. And even though it does say the headless ghost on the front, the translation of the title from Japanese means "Where is my head?", which is kind of hilarious. Not to be left out, South Korea got in on this one as well, with an amazing cover featuring a red ghost floating out in front of a castle. What I really like about this one is the juxtaposition of the red ghost and the black and white castle in the background, including the ghostly figure standing in the window. Lots of great covers for this book, but I think the North American release is outclassed by the Japanese and South Korean offerings. Phantom of the Auditorium is a very simple cover, but that's part of its charm. It's clearly riffing on the Phantom of the Opera, and I've got a soft spot for the 1925 classic, which just so happens to be celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. While nothing crazy is happening in the artwork, the use of purple, shadow, and a glowing light from behind the curtain is really effective. I especially like how the spotlight trails the Phantom as he slips back into the dark. Jacobus even toyed with the idea of doing a more close-up, in-your-face version of the Phantom, but I think the subtlety of this approach works so much better. The classic Goosebumps reprint went a little busier, showing the Phantom lurking under the stage, but I'll always prefer the less is more approach of the original. Internationally, things get weird. The French went Nosferatu instead of Phantom, which is wild but oddly fitting. They later updated it with something more Phantom-like, though less interesting. The Dutch cover? That one's basically the Toxic Avenger in a cape, complete with a young girl pleading, "No, Toxie, don't pull that rope!" South Korea comes back in with another very interesting cover, because is this not the Babadook? I mean, it kinda looks like the Babadook to me. Even the art style is similar. I think South Korea might have a lawsuit on their hands. If I had to choose one cover though, I might actually choose the South Korean version. I kind of love what they do with this series. How I Got My Shrunken Head is one that is kind of near and dear to me. I remember picking this one up at the Scholastic Book Fair, and I swear I can still smell this book. I would stare at this cover all day long in class, even getting in trouble by my teacher because I wasn't paying attention. That shrunken head just made my imagination go wild about what the story could be about. This one features some of Jacobus' most well-known attributes in the series, from the warped perspective, the tiled floor, and yes, those damn Converse shoes make a return. When Jacobus was coming up with a design for this one, he sketched out a bunch of different heads until he found one that he liked. He also came up with a few designs showing piles of heads, which may have been a little too dark for this tongue-in-cheek children's horror story. The reprint of the story actually corrected something the Jacobus original sorta got wrong, and that's the shrunken head is actually shrunken. The one in the original art is still a full-sized head, but regardless, I still prefer it. The French had a few variations on this one. First, a hand holding a more realistic shrunken head, which is kinda creepy. Second is a kid sinking in quicksand while the head watches on, which is something I thought would be a much bigger issue when I got older. And an updated version where once again, a kid is sinking in quicksand, this time while holding the head, though it's sullied by the Disney stink on the front. The Spanish version is kind of funny because it has a young girl dreaming about a shrunken head. Why would she be dreaming about a shrunken head? The Dutch version has a kid walking through what looks like a bubbling swamp while something watches in the background. And the Korean version, I don't even know what to say. It looks like someone told their 5-year-old to grab some crayons and scribble out a face vomiting up ghosts. I honestly don't know what else this is supposed to be. I also love its title, The Heads That Call Evil Spirits. Just because of nostalgia, I think I like the original best, but there are some really solid ones in the bunch. A Night in Terror Tower is another one near and dear to my heart. I again picked this one up at the Scholastic Book Fair, and I thought the executioner with an axe was so cool. However, I remember being disappointed by the story. Now the cover is really simple. A big jacked executioner carrying an axe to deal with someone who probably stole an apple, or maybe looked at the king the wrong way, who knows. Jacobus claimed this is his least favorite cover of the entire series, and I wonder if that comes down to the fact that he spent 34 hours of non-stop painting to get it done in time. I think having to work 34 hours straight would make anyone hate their own work. Still though, it definitely doesn't look like it was a rushed project. The reprint is way more cartoony, and I have no idea what kind of human has proportions like this. Sure, Jacobus' version might have more muscle than the average Mr. Olympia, but he at least still looked human. This just looks like a big blob. International releases had some interesting takes on the cover as well. The UK version featured hands trying to escape from a prison cell. The French version is a little more realistic, but I don't really like what they did with this one. The South Korean version, however, I think that's an executioner, but why does it give me Bloodborne vibes? And does anyone know what he's saying? If you do, please let me know. I still think I'd take the original cover over the others though, even though Jacobus doesn't seem to be a fan. Deep Trouble 2 definitely taps into one of my biggest fears. Deep water. I don't know what it is, but I hate the idea of being out there because hey, there could be a giant goldfish lurking, just waiting to swallow me whole. The cover nails that scale perfectly. This massive fish looming over a sunken ship really drives home just how absurdly big it is. I also love the color work here. Those bright yellows and oranges of the fish really pop against the shimmering blues and muted greens of the deep. Fun fact, but Jacobus actually used his own pet goldfish as reference for this cover. His girlfriend at the time gave it to him, and apparently the fish just kept growing and growing. By the time it died 4 years later, he'd spent more money keeping that fish alive than he was paid to paint this cover. The early sketches are also pretty great. One has the fish trying to capsize a boat, while another has it trailing behind a swimmer. That last one felt a little too close to the original Deep Trouble, so I get why they didn't go with it. Internationally, the only alternate version comes from Italy, and instead of a goldfish, they went full Lovecraft with a giant octopus. And honestly, that's way scarier. Forget goldfish, giant squid terrify me way more. Who doesn't love a good Abominable Snowman story? The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena is such a fun cover, and as a big fan of cryptids, anything with Yetis or Bigfoot immediately grabs my attention. Here we get this massive Yeti just casually ripping a lamppost apart at its base. If you ever stumbled across a snowman this size, let's be honest, you're done, bud. Still, I kinda feel bad for the guy. He looks terrifying, but stuck in sunny Pasadena? That poor beast must be absolutely roasting under all that fur. The 2015 reprint though? Yikes. I don't know what they were going for, but it looks nothing like a Yeti. Why does it have a bald spot? Did the Abominable Snowman hit middle age and start losing hair? It's just bad. Internationally, things get a little more interesting. Indonesia went simple but clever, keeping the Yeti hidden in the shadows, which actually makes it creepier and more mysterious. South Korea's version looks more like a giant Japanese macaque than a traditional Yeti. Still cool, but definitely not what I picture when I think Abominable Snowman. At the end of the day, I think the original nails it best. A huge, classic-looking Yeti tearing things up. Exactly what you want when you hear that title. The Haunted School, which is about as generic of a title that you can get, features a locker exploding with textbooks and ghosts, and of course, Converse shoes for some reason. This is a simple cover that uses the pastel colors of pink and orange against the grays and shadows of the ghosts. In an early color mock-up, there was actually going to be some kind of serpentine being in the locker, and not the ghostly children. There was also an idea of having this creature burst through a chalkboard, hopefully while the teacher was droning on about fractions. The French version looks like some kid got a wedgie while ghost eyes float around his head. There's an updated version with some ghostly children, which is a little more cartoony and less interesting in my opinion. Denmark has an interesting cover that looks more like something you'd see in 30 Days of Night than you would from Goosebumps. Are these kids vampires? And why are they both missing an eye? Iceland has one that uses an actual photograph of a classroom of children and some shadowy figure in the background. Indonesia has one of their own too, which honestly just looks like a massive fart cloud just escaped from a locker. I think I still like the original the most, but there are some pretty interesting covers here. It Came From Beneath the Sink is a pretty fun cover, even if it feels a little standard. Personally, with a bit of plumbing experience under my belt, I can tell you there are way scarier things living under sinks than this monster. Still, the idea of a creature lurking beneath your basin is pretty great, though realistically, how big is this thing supposed to be? There's not exactly a lot of room under there, yet it looks massive. Jacobus uses one of his favorite tricks here, weird angles that draw your eyes straight toward the creature. Add in the checkered floor, another one of his trademarks, and it all comes together nicely. The international versions get wild. The UK went with a sponge monster, which is actually a unique twist. France stuck close to the original design, but without Jacobus's dramatic perspective. The Dutch cover? It looks exactly like something I once had to pull out of a drainage pipe. Japan took a big swing. Their version shows hands holding a bloody ball with eyeballs. I guess that's the monster? Their title is also amazing, roughly translated to people eating gruel. Korea has a girl running from shadowy figures, though what really catches my eye is her shirt that reads "Save the Earth" in English. No idea why, but it's a fun detail. And then there's Indonesia, where a monster hand bursts from a sink on a book hilariously titled "The Tiny Creature That Brings Disaster." As much as I love the original, I think the Japanese cover might actually be my favorite, but the Indonesian title alone deserves an award. This one's a fun cover, even if there isn't a whole lot going on. Just some disembodied hands tapping away at a piano. It's spooky, but in a silly sort of way. Considering it's for kids, I get why Jacobus didn't add blood, but I think even a faint ghostly outline of arms raising from the keys would have pushed the supernatural angle nicely. Early sketches showed a few different perspectives, but the final version works well enough. The funniest bit of trivia here is that the book was originally going to be called Guitar Lessons Can Be Murder, since R.L. Stine's son was taking guitar lessons at the time, but he was talked into switching it since pianos are apparently spookier? I'm not sure I agree unless you've ever been forced to listen to Chopsticks on repeat. The UK cover kinda spoils the story's twist by hinting at robotics, which makes it look more weird than scary. And the French version goes super basic with skeleton hands from a top-down view. It gets the point across, but it doesn't hold a candle to Jacobus's playful original. The Ghost Next Door has a really nice classic Goosebumps vibe. I love the spooky ghost legs standing right on the welcome mat, like even specters know to wipe their feet before haunting. Jacobus leans on a few of his signatures here. Warped perspectives, checkered floors, and of course, Converse shoes. Only this time, ghostly Converse shoes. Later reprints swap the sneakers for a ghostly hand knocking on the door with a goblin-faced knocker. It's fine, but the original simplicity works better for me. The international covers are kinda wild. The UK one looks like a kid either going Super Saiyan or suffering from explosive gas. France gives us a fiery ghost at the window, though I can't tell if the ghost is burning or if it's just a bad day for the curtains. The updated French version leans almost anime. The Dutch cover has a ghost who just looks lonely, but the kids are shooing him away. What, because he's dead? Real spirit phobia going on there, kids. The Japanese version, on the other hand, is legitimately terrifying. A child trapped inside what looks like a burning building, straight out of The Ring or The Grudge. South Korea throws in a ghost trying to escape its host, except the host looks scarier than the ghost. And Indonesia? Of course, they give us another fart cloud like their haunted school cover. This time, the smoke is billowing from a fence with a spooky face. Effective? Maybe. Gassy? Absolutely. Overall, the Japanese cover takes the crown here for being genuinely dark, but there are a lot of fun ones to pick from. Here's one I've always really liked. The vampire lurching from his crypt, clutching dead flowers with a bottle of vampire breath spilled on the ground. It's moody, creepy, and just a little ridiculous. But it raises a big question. What exactly is vampire breath? Is he inhaling it? Or is the jar trapping the fumes coming from him? Because if this dude hasn't brushed in 500 years, I wouldn't be surprised if the bottle is just working overtime as an air freshener. I believe in the story the vampire actually comes from the jar, but either way the design sticks with me. The face is long and gaunt, with eyes that are part party jester, part I haven't slept since the Renaissance. And those wilted flowers? Gotta wonder if they died from his stench alone. Early sketches show Jacobus experimenting with different angles, and the vampire was actually modeled on his reference photographer Michael. The classic Goosebumps version is more stylized, though honestly the vampire looks even derpier than I thought possible. For the international covers, the French one leans heavily on Christopher Lee's Dracula. Probably not intentional, but the resemblance is uncanny. South Korea went in the opposite direction, making the vampire look more cartoonish, almost like a Nosferatu parody. They're fun variations, but for me the original cover is still the king of the crypt. This one's interesting because it's one of only 2 classic Goosebumps covers not painted by Tim Jacobus. He was on vacation, so artist Stanislaw Fernandez stepped in, a guy best known for some iconic movie posters like The Wrath of Khan and The Dead Zone. Not a bad substitute. His take gives us a young girl staring into a cracking crystal ball with a look like she just made the absolute worst mistake of her life. I love the simplicity here, the darkness creeping in, the hazy fever dream atmosphere, and that fragile orb ready to shatter. It's eerie without being overcomplicated. Jacobus eventually circled back in 2005 to do his own version. And while it's good, I'll admit nostalgia wins out for me. The original just feels right. Later reprints went even cartoonier, which is fine, but it loses some of that unsettling vibe. International editions went all over the map. The UK went with another cracked crystal ball, reflecting a girl on one side and maybe a dead bird? Or maybe it's alive and flying? Hard to say, but it's weird either way. France leaned into the old hag fortune teller cliche, but with a crystal ball that honestly looks more like a red bowling ball. Iceland gave us a girl pulling her best Undertaker impression, complete with a 1,000-yard stare. South Korea played it straighter with a cloaked fortune teller peering into her orb. Solid, but not as wild as some of their other covers. At the end of the day, I still think the original Fernandez artwork is the standout. Simple, moody, and haunting in a way that later ones just can't quite capture. This one's pretty iconic, even if it leans on the simple side, and honestly, I'm fine with that. Who doesn't love the classic look of a bandage-wrapped mummy? The way the fabric is just slightly pulled back to reveal those dark glowing red eyes really sells the creep factor. Jacobus actually experimented early on with giving the mummy more human-like eyes, but I think that would have killed the mood. It's the same problem as when they show Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees' eyes. It humanizes them too much, when really they should just feel like soulless monsters. So yeah, good call keeping those burning voids. The one thing I've always wondered though, what is the mummy standing in front of? It looks like some random stone backdrop. A little more creativity there might have elevated this one further. Fun fact, it also shares its title with the Hammer horror film The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, which probably didn't hurt its spooky cred. The reprints and international covers take some big swings. The 2009 reprint tries to up the menace, showing part of the mummy's rotting jaw. The background pops a little bit more, but I still like the original better. The UK version features a mummy emerging from bright pink slime, with what looks more like jazz hands than a death threat. Fabulous, darling! France nailed it with a skeletal mummy lurching from its sarcophagus. The later French update though went cartoony and lost all that atmosphere. For the Netherlands, one version shows kids discovering the mummy, but they look more bored than terrified. Another has the sarcophagus shooting beams of light or energy from its eyes, which at least makes it feel more dramatic. The Vietnam cover shows a mummy in pure agony. Maybe being resurrected after 1,000 years really does hurt. South Korea went big with an angry-looking mummy backed by a whole army of them. Now that's a threat. As much fun as these variations are, I keep coming back to the original. The Cuckoo Clock of Doom hits that perfect balance of silly and menacing. The warped perspective makes it look like the cuckoo bird is flying straight at you, and considering how angry he looks, that's probably the last thing you'd want. I always loved the cover and the title, even if I wasn't a huge fan of the actual story. Jacobus admitted he had a blast painting this one, because the whole concept of a scary cuckoo clock cracked him up. You can see that playful energy in the art. It's creepy, but it also has a bit of Tweety Bird, Looney Tunes vibe going on. His early sketches tried out a few different angles, but they all stuck to the same basic idea. The international covers take some wild swings. In the UK, their bird looks less like a cuckoo bird and more like the giant claw, which is hilarious in its own right. France went for a more mechanical vibe, like something out of an old 18th century clock. Their updated version kept the robotic look, but it feels too streamlined and way less interesting. The Netherlands features a very angry, realistic bird bursting out, while the kids in the scene look like they could care less. Japan completely steals the show. Their version has a beautifully creepy old clock with what looks like a green portal to another dimension inside. It's eerie, mysterious, and honestly, sorry Jacobus, but I think I like this one the best. When you're young, it's always scary to leave the comfort of your home and to go to summer camp. Well, the horror at Camp Jelly Jam might be the scariest, because I'm pretty sure the camp counselor is, well, I'm not gonna go there. The camp counselor looks way too happy with his toothy grin and pants pulled right up to his chin. The cabins are white and pristine, but the wood's darkened sky tells you that Camp Jelly Jam is not all that it would seem. The camp counselor is actually modeled off Jacobus himself, though he kinda looks like Tom Arnold in this photo. In some of the original sketches, the cabins in the background were supposed to be ramshackle dumps, barely holding on, but after some feedback, Jacobus made them look cleaner and more unassuming, which makes sense if you're trying to present the camp as innocuous as possible. The reprint cover is not great and basically gives away the monster of the book. The French cover does the same, but I think it looks a little more interesting than the reprint cover. Still, I think the original cover is the best since it doesn't just immediately give away what the story is about. Ghost Camp has a fun cover with a bunch of campers who all appear to be ghosts, except for one young girl who's just suddenly realized that all her friends are dead. Seriously, look how far they walked out from camp before she realized that something wasn't quite right. The ghostly children, dark and stormy night, and dead tree really set the mood for some good spooky fun. A few early sketches show the ghostly campers enjoying a nice campfire, but I love how the camp is called Camp Wanna Run. The French cover features the spookiest thing of all, a ghost camper wearing jorts. Oh, maybe this is just a young John Cena. A reprinted French version shows a more Disney-fied cover, which is never a good thing. Interestingly, the Korean cover shares a similar concept to the French reprint, but it's much spookier, showing part of a camper's face turning skeletal, with creepier ghost-like figures watching from the background. The Japanese cover, though, is hands down my favorite. A giant skull leering over the tree line, looking down at a campfire as wisps of ghostly energy sort of wisp around it. It's really awesome and definitely my favorite of the bunch. The Barking Ghost is a pretty simple cover, but I can't help but love it. There's just something about a snarling beast that works perfectly for Goosebumps. Would it have been a little better if the dog was crawling out of some creepy rotted doghouse? Maybe, but even just having this terrifying pup front and center gets the job done. Most of the earlier sketches stuck to the same idea, though they leaned more towards a realistic dog. What we ended up with is something a little stranger. The ridge along the top of its head makes it look slightly off, like it's not exactly natural, but maybe that's the whole point. A little too uncanny, a little too supernatural. Funny enough, R.L. Stine has said this is one of his least favorite books in the series, but it's also one of his favorite covers, so go figure. The UK version, meanwhile, features its own snarling mutt peeking up through some slime, but compared to Jacobus' original work, it just doesn't hit the same way. Night of the Living Dummy 2 brings back everyone's favorite troublemaker Slappy for more mischief and mayhem. Out of all the covers we've looked at so far, this one is definitely the most colorful. The bright pastel pinks, blues, and greens really pop against the darker browns and blacks of Slappy himself. It gives the whole piece this playful yet sinister vibe, like you know something's wrong but you can't help being drawn in. What really sells it are the reactions of the other stuffed animals. That poor rabbit looks like it just saw a ghost, and honestly, maybe it did. Some of Jacobus' early designs are great too. One shows Slappy casually lounging in bed, while another one has him about to drop a full-on Macho Man Randy Savage elbow onto a stuffed animal. The reprint isn't too bad either, swapping in dripping red paint as a stand-in for blood. It's a cheeky way to make the cover look more mature without actually pushing it too far. France got a fun variation where Slappy holds a paintbrush that almost looks like a blade, with red paint dripping off it and his shadow against the wall forming devil horns. Their later reprint leans more into Slappy's movie design, which makes sense but feels less creative. South Korea's take is more subdued, featuring two dolls sitting on a couch in what looks like a dim hallway. Not a bad cover, but I think the original's mix of color, menace, and playfulness makes it hard to beat. The Blob That Ate Everyone is an obvious homage to John Carpenter's The Thing. Alright, it's actually an homage to The Blob, which, I mean, duh. It's grotesque in this fun 50s B-movie sort of way. The Blob itself is this massive pink veiny mass, but unlike most blob monsters, this one has bulging eyes and a disgusting floppy tongue. It's equal parts gross and goofy, which makes it perfect for Goosebumps. This also happens to be one of Tim Jacobus' favorite covers. When asked why, his answer was basically, I don't know, maybe because someone actually paid me to paint a giant tongue? Early sketches stuck pretty close to the final design, though one concept had the blob looming over a house with its tongue flopped across the roof, like some grotesque welcome mat. The reprint might even be nastier, with the veins more pronounced and the overall texture slimier and more grotesque. France went a slightly different direction with their version, showing a worm-like, almost amphibian blob oozing through the streets as people flee in terror. Korea took things in an even stranger direction, depicting a child running across the blob's tongue as the creature, who honestly looks like Krang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, looms in the background. All of these are fun in their own ways, but I think Jacobus' original nails that perfect mix of retro horror and over-the-top weirdness. Don't Go to Sleep is Goosebumps doing the classic monster under the bed scenario. I think every kid at some point wondered if something might be lurking in the shadows down below. The massive clawed arm reaching out for the terrified boy is fantastic. Simple, scary, and straight to the point. Add in the lightning storm outside the window, and Jacobus' trademark warping of the bedroom walls, and you've got an image that feels like a childhood nightmare come to life. The funny part? There's no actual monster under the bed in the story. Tim Jacobus admitted that often he was given very little to work with. Sometimes just a few pages or a quick summary, and he had to come up with something that felt appropriately creepy. In this case, he leaned into pure boogeyman territory, and honestly, it works perfectly. Some of the early concept sketches are fun to look at. One has monstrous arms stretching out from the headboard, while another shows them reaching over the child's shoulder as he stares down at the floor. But the final version was the right call. Clean, direct, and instantly relatable for any kid who's ever stared nervously at their bed in the dark. France, as usual, went in a completely different direction. Their cover ditches the bed entirely and instead shows a boy in mid-transformation into some kind of monster. To be fair, the French title translates to Nightmare Nights, so it makes a little more sense in that context. Their reprint version shifts things yet again, this time into Monster in the Closet territory. Still, for me, Jacobus' original is the clear winner. It taps into one of the most universal childhood fears and distills it into a single unforgettable image. How to Kill a Monster is one of those covers I have a real soft spot for. Back in grade 4 or 5, I had to write a short story for class, and naturally, because I was already a monster kid, I went full horror. My story was full of graphic detail, people getting ripped apart, entrails spilling everywhere, other characters vomiting at the sight, you know, the usual completely normal things that every 10-year-old writes about. And for the finishing touch, I traced over this book's cover for my story's illustration. I copied the monster hands, the doorway, and then just added some random background items. My teacher handed it back to me and told me I was very creative, but the look on her face said, "What on earth is wrong with this child?" Needless to say, I've had a soft spot for this cover ever since. Design-wise, it's simple but effective. A big monster opening a bedroom door, which is such a classic Goosebumps setup. Some of the early sketches are fun to peek at too. One has the monster lurking in a closet, while another shows it blasting through the door as terrified kids try to push back against it. The international versions get a little weirder. The French cover basically turns the monster into a crocodile or alligator creature. I can never remember which nose shape is which. And the Dutch version also features a scaly monster, but for some reason it's wearing a shirt, which only makes it look sillier. They're interesting takes, but for me, Jacobus' original still takes the crown, partly because nothing beats a good old-fashioned monster at the door moment. Let's Get Invisible is such a fun cover. You've got this young boy absolutely terrified at the thought of turning invisible, which on the surface doesn't sound so bad. As a kid, it's the kind of power you dream about. You could sneak around, play pranks, get into all sorts of mischief. But when you really think about it, it would probably turn into one of the loneliest experiences possible. One detail I found interesting is that the cobwebs on the cover aren't actually part of Jacobus' art. Some mystery person at Scholastic decided the image needed to be spookier and slapped them on without his input. And while they were removed for the re-release, I'd still love to know who this phantom web-slinger was. The later reprints took things in a different direction, showing the kid vanishing starting at the head instead of the legs. It's a neat idea, but I miss that original look of panic that really helped sell the concept. The international versions are all over the place. The UK went in an odd direction with a very happy looking child and a pair of hands reaching out from the mirror behind them. France kept it simple with a girl halfway through the glass, though their updated version has a cartoonish flair, featuring a shattered mirror and a panicked expression that does work nicely. South Korea delivered something more abstract, a ghostly child slipping from the mirror while a giant eyeball watches from behind the frame. But my favorite has to be the Japanese edition. It's got this creepy old mirror in a dark attic, and inside you see these horrifying ghostly figures clawing to get free. Add in the wisps of psychic energy glowing behind the glass, and it's just gorgeous. Honestly, I wish Japan had done every cover, but sadly they only got around to about 10. Say Cheese and Die Again is the sequel to Say Cheese and Die, and the cover art is pretty much a rehash of the first book. A photograph of a seemingly normal scene that somehow comes out looking creepy. This time though, the style leans a little more cartoony. The skeletons still have their eyes, which adds a silliness to the scene. And for some reason, the Goofy family dog always cracks me up. Jacobus' early sketches and mock-ups were actually creepier, missing the eyes entirely, which makes me wonder if Scholastic directed him to tone it down. By this point, maybe they were trying to soften the series' image for younger readers. The French version takes a darker approach, featuring a creepy man snapping a Polaroid of someone, with the developing photo revealing a skeleton. It's definitely more unsettling than the original's playful cartoon vibe. Overall, while the cover is fun, it's not nearly as haunting as its predecessor. Return of the Mummy is a sequel to The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, though it doesn't actually feature the same mummy, which can make the title a little confusing. I actually prefer this cover art to the original. It keeps the creature more of a mystery. You see just the mummy's hand reaching out of the sarcophagus, with the implied stench of decay trailing behind. Sometimes I think the suggestion of horror is scarier than seeing the monster in full. The reprint takes the subtle idea and cranks it up to 11, making the scene feel far more kinetic. The UK version dials down the jazz hands energy, but the mummy ends up looking more like a toddler clutching a favorite toy. The French cover leans into a more skeletal design, and their updated version goes for a smoother, almost digital airbrush quality that feels less tangible. Meanwhile, the South Korean edition shows the mummy reaching out through a wall of wrappings, in a style reminiscent of old folktale illustrations. Even with all these variations, I still prefer the simplicity and eerie subtlety of the original Jacobus cover. Welcome to Camp Nightmare is a banger of a cover. You've got a lone tent deep in the woods, dead and gnarled trees scattered about, rolling clouds, and dark ominous skies. To top it off, something is reaching into the tent. I love how much of the scene is kept in shadow. You really only catch the monster's glowing eyes and clawed hand as it stretches inside. On the spookiness scale, this one is definitely near the top. Some early sketches played with a perspective looking out from the tent, catching a creature staring back, which feels reminiscent of the monster under the bed vibe from Don't Go to Sleep. Here's a fun fact. R.L. Stine got the idea for the title after visiting his son's summer camp, which was apparently infested with bugs. The success of this book also kicked off Stine's summer tradition of writing a camp-themed book each year from 1995 through 1999. The reprint leans far more cartoony, toning down the horror and even making the monster look kind of cuddly. France released a few variations. The first is more otherworldly than genuinely scary, while another keeps the lurking tent concept, with the monster looking like a goblin. A more recent updated French cover might be my favorite. A few kids' silhouettes glow from within their tents as a mysterious creature reminiscent of the cryptid The Rake lingers outside. The Dutch cover has kids barely reacting to a giant fly monster on their tent, while South Korea goes abstract, showing a child fleeing some shadowy figure among tiny cabins that play with perspective. Even with all the international twists, the original Jacobus cover remains my favorite. The Girl Who Cried Monster is a really fun classic cover. You've got a young girl discovering that the school librarian is in fact a monster, because who else would be eating bugs? The perspective of her peeking through the door as the librarian devours insects is great, and it feels more grounded and realistic than some of Jacobus's later, more exaggerated covers. Early sketches explored similar ideas from different angles, but I like that Jacobus used himself as a reference for the creepy librarian. He apparently thought it would be funny to draw himself bald, but now that he actually is bald, I wonder if he still finds it amusing. The international covers take some wild turns. The UK cover shows a girl seemingly terrified of books, which is totally relatable if you're like me and can't read. The French cover goes way off the rails, depicting a creature with its eyes literally popping from its sockets, about to eat a turtle. Look, you can eat all the bugs you want, but once you start going after turtles, you've gone too far, mister. Their newer version shifts the perspective inside the monster's mouth, again threatening a poor turtle. The Dutch cover goes more realistic, featuring kids who seem barely fazed by a librarian consuming turtles, jellyfish, and a small fish. Indonesia, on the other hand, is like, okay, those covers are nice, but what if it's a girl taking photos of the librarian with tentacles and fart clouds? A very weird and fun design, but I like the original artwork the best. Attack of the Jack-O-Lanterns is one of those covers that just oozes Halloween spirit. Honestly, slap a pumpkin on anything and it's automatically getting bonus points from me. Some trick-or-treaters roaming the night with jack-o'-lantern heads? Surely those couldn't actually be their real heads though, right? The deep blues and purples of the background contrast beautifully against the glowing orange faces, and that eerie light glow behind them hints at something far more sinister lurking beneath. And I've gotta say, the pumpkin puppy steals the show. His goofy grin just makes me smile every time I see it. The early sketches were mostly in line with the final product, just slight perspective variations, and Tim Jacobus even used a couple young models to capture the pumpkin-headed kids' movements. The later reprint dialed up the menace, making the pumpkin faces sharper and far more sinister, which really leans into the horror side of things. France went in the opposite direction though. Their pumpkin head looks less like a jack-o'-lantern and more like a giant tomato. Italy's version, on the other hand, almost feels like it stepped straight out of The Nightmare Before Christmas, with a playful Burton-esque vibe. South Korea really nailed the spooky angle with a cloaked figure holding a flaming jack-o'-lantern, giving off serious Headless Horseman vibes. The creepy house and dead tree in the background make it even spookier. While the original cover captures the fun side of Halloween perfectly, I think the South Korean version might edge it out for me. That one feels darker, spookier, and just a little more dangerous. Ghost Beach is one of those covers that just instantly transports me back to my childhood. I first grabbed this one at a Scholastic book fair, and trust me, if you were a kid in the 90s, that was a big deal. I remember staring at this cover for what felt like hours back in 2nd grade. The image is so simple yet haunting. A ghostly figure rising from a grave as waves crash against the coastline, with the full moon casting an eerie glow behind it. I love the design of the ghost itself. It's got that classic hooded look that feels like a hybrid between the old bedsheet ghost and the Grim Reaper. The early sketches toyed with some wild ideas, like a ghostly man entering a cave, or waves literally transforming into a ghostly figure. Cool concepts, but honestly, the strength of the final cover lies in its simplicity. The reprint though, I am not a fan. It trades atmosphere for a more in-your-face ghost, and in doing so loses all the moodiness and mystery of the original. International covers had some interesting spins though. The UK version is stripped down, a hand reaching from the ground beside a tombstone. France gave us a skeleton hand tapping someone on their shoulder, with the person's expression screaming, "Please stop touching me." Their reprint was even cooler, turning a cave entrance into a monstrous ghostly maw. Spain, well, Spain gave us a confused kid being lunged at by what looks like a ghost tiger. Iceland went with a literal sheet ghost sporting a goofy jack-o'-lantern grin. It's silly but oddly charming. Korea delivered big time with a manga-style ghost that feels like it's rushing right at the reader. Really dynamic and striking. As creative as many of these interpretations are, my heart still belongs to the original. It's moody, it's eerie, and it perfectly captures that gothic seaside ghost story vibe. A shocker on Shock Street is pure B-movie madness, and that's exactly why I love it. The cover feels ripped right out of a 1950s monster flick. As a kid, I was obsessed with those kinds of movies, so this one always stood out to me. I also happened to have a pet praying mantis that I would feed moths to, watching gleefully as it ripped off their wings and devoured their heads. Yeah, I was a bit of a twisted child. One detail that went over my head back then though is that the mantis on the cover isn't just a giant bug, it's actually a robot. Looking at it now, the shiny chrome body is a dead giveaway, but younger me was really stupid and totally missed it. The title itself is also a fun nod, playing off A Nightmare on Elm Street, though don't expect Freddy Krueger to pop out anywhere in these pages. Some of the early sketches leaned harder into the movie vibe, showing the mantis on a film set with fake trees and houses, which really sells the B-movie parody concept. The reprint basically keeps the same idea, but cranks up the energy in typical Goosebumps fashion. The international versions get pretty weird. France swapped the mantis for what looks like a giant crab monster attacking the city, while Korea kept the mantis but went a little more abstract with the design. I do appreciate how later interpretations gave the mantis more soulless insect-like eyes, but for me, the original cover is still the clear winner. It's big, it's bold, it's cheesy in the best way, just like the monster movies it's paying homage to. The Curse of Camp Cold Lake is one of the spookiest Goosebumps covers Jacobus ever did, especially considering this was a period where the series was starting to lean more into the silly side. I mean, the very next book is My Friend is Invisible, which is about as far from terrifying as you can get. What makes this one stand out is just how committed it is to actually being scary. The skeletal girl peeking out just above the water's surface, the light fog rolling over the lake, the dead and dying trees in the background, and the faint glow of morning light, it all combines into a perfectly eerie vibe. You can practically feel the chill of dawn in the air, or maybe that's just the chill running down your spine as this undead figure silently stares you down. Jacobus himself has mentioned that this was one of his favorites to paint, since he got to go full horror rather than cartoonish. Some of his early sketches showed the ghostly girl in her entirety, while others had her lunging out toward the reader. Creepy ideas, but the restraint of just her head breaking the surface works so much better. France was the only one to do a variant cover this time, and it's a strange one. It shows a girl holding a snake, just staring blankly past the serpent. I honestly can't tell if her shirt is torn, or if she's just slimed up, but either way it's more odd than scary. Interesting sure, but nowhere near as chilling as Jacobus' design. The Haunted Mask 2 has such a fantastic design, and what makes it even better is that it's set on Halloween night. The cover shows a trick-or-treater wearing this grotesque old man mask. Its teeth are rotting and falling out, the skin on the forehead is peeling away, but is it really a mask? Or could that somehow be his actual face? The dark, foggy background sets the perfect eerie mood, with a lone lamppost faintly glowing, and a couple of jack-o'-lanterns on the porch steps completing the Halloween vibe. It's a cover that just oozes October spookiness. Jacobus' early sketches were all basically the same composition, just with subtle tweaks in perspective. The updated reprint took things in a slightly witchier direction. The mask looks less like an old man and more like something out of Hocus Pocus, but it still keeps the overall mood just with a shinier, more modern polish. The French releases went in some very different directions. One has a trick-or-treater pulling at their face in a way that almost looks like they're peeling their own skin off, with the dead white eyes that feel straight out of Evil Dead. Another design features a kid screaming at this weird red mask face thing. It's not bad, it's just a little confusing. The reprint version is basically that same design, but flatter and less detailed. The real standout though is the South Korean edition. It shows a child standing beside a mirror, and in the reflection the kid is wearing the haunted mask. It's unsettling in a way that feels right at home in a Korean horror movie. Creepy, psychological, and way more haunting than you'd expect from a Goosebumps cover. As much as I love Jacobus' Halloween Perfect Original, I think Korea might have actually taken the crown here. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, Deep Trouble makes it very clear that it's never safe to go back in the water. The cover is an obvious homage to the Jaws poster, though instead of a great white, Jacobus went with a hammerhead shark, probably to avoid looking like a total ripoff, and honestly that choice makes it stand out even more. This one terrified me as a kid. I loved fishing, camping, and being outdoors, but the idea of swimming in deep, open water always freaked me out. Covers like this didn't help either. It planted the thought that something could always be lurking just beneath you. For the art, Jacobus actually used photos of his friend sitting on a stool to get the dangling, weightless look of the boy's limbs just right. The shark reference came straight from an encyclopedia image. Early sketches played around with different setups, like the shark breaking the surface or stalking its victim from behind, but the Jaws-inspired composition was just too strong not to use. The reprint cranked things up by making the shark look even more ferocious and even throwing a giant skull into the background. The UK version went in a totally different direction, with a scuba diver and some menacing tentacles. France, they leaned right into the Jaws parody before eventually swapping the shark for a tentacled sea monster. South Korea brought things back to basics with a stark great white charging the reader. Done in black, white, gray, and a splash of red, it's simple but striking. As cool as some of those takes are, nothing beats the original for me. That hammerhead, the deep blue water, that sense of dread, it's burned into my brain forever. Stay Out of the Basement is the second book in the series, and the second book to not feature the artwork of Tim Jacobus. When Scholastic was looking for artists for the books, they hired two men, Tim Jacobus and Jim Thiessen. When Jim handed in his work for Stay Out of the Basement, even though Scholastic loved it, they felt his style was too mature and too realistic, and that Jacobus' style fit the fun and spooky vibe they had in mind for the series. And it's unfortunate that he didn't get to stick around because Jim Thiessen's cover for Stay Out of the Basement is one of my favorites in the series. You just have this human yet plant-like hand slowly opening the door to the basement. It's creepy but also intriguing because it makes you want to know what's going on. Years later though, Jacobus would get his art on the front cover when they switched to a more playful version, showing a man turning into a tree monster. It's a nice cover, but I much prefer the ambiguity of Thiessen's. Years later it would be updated again by Brandon Dorman, who was the main Goosebumps artist from around 2008 to 2023. He did the reprint of the cover, which sort of brought things full circle, going back to a similar design started by Thiessen, though a lot more cartoony. For the UK release, we've got a kid whose head is surrounded by vines, which is weird. The French version has a child being attacked and choked by vines, which is kind of violent. Its later reprint would show vines slowly making their way up the stairs. The Dutch would come in with their own kid being strangled by plant, and another design where yet another child is being choked by plants. Korea decided to throw all that nonsense out the window, however, when they designed this bizarre cover featuring a mad scientist growing plants on his head. Though when I look at it quickly, it almost looks like a punk rocker with a mohawk. Japan decided to throw their leaf in the ring with a very different cover that shows like a containment unit growing a plant-human hybrid and like tomatoes hanging or some kind of fruit with these disturbed human-like faces. It's very weird, but I really like it. Still though, it's the original for me. That's one of my favorites in the series, period. Night of the Living Dummy is one of the most iconic Goosebumps covers ever made. There's just something inherently creepy about ventriloquist dummies. The blank, glassy stare, that too wide grin, the furrowed brow that makes them look like they're plotting something awful. Jacobus captured all of that in one chilling close-up. Here's the funny part though, despite Slappy being front and center on the cover, he's not even the main villain in this book. That honor goes to Mr. Wood. Still, Slappy stole the spotlight, and he's the one who went on to become the Goosebumps mascot. The title itself is a clever play on George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, swapping out zombies for creepy puppets. Jacobus's early drafts showed the dummy sitting in a suitcase or perched in a chair, but the simplicity of the close-up is what really makes this work. You don't need the whole body, you just need the face staring right back at you. The reprint leaned harder into making Slappy look alive and sinister, but honestly I think the original wins out for its sheer subtle menace. Given its popularity, this book got a lot of international variations. The UK version has Slappy giving the reader a wink, which if anything makes him creepier. France used an image of Slappy smiling at a child like he's plotting his next evil trick. Their later reprint, however, toned things way down and ended up being pretty forgettable. Denmark produced a sketchier, rougher version that's actually pretty unnerving. Indonesia added one of their signature fart clouds, this time billowing out of Slappy's pocket. Vietnam's cover has him sitting stiffly in a chair, which gives off a real uncanny vibe. South Korea's take is especially strange. The dummy looks a little different, like he just raided the fridge during a midnight snack binge. Maybe that's supposed to be Mr. Wood, but either way, it's an oddball design. And then there's Japan, which went all out. Slappy perched on a windowsill, the moonlight casting a shadow across the floor, but the shadow just isn't a shadow, it's some kind of demonic entity, and it's honestly brilliant. I won't say it's better than Jacobus's original, but it's easily on the same level. One thing Goosebumps never did was show actual blood, but nobody said they couldn't show monster blood, the first in a whole string of sequels. This book skips giant hamsters and growing kids in favor of a much creepier image. Thick green slime oozing down a staircase, and just to make you wonder, there's a pair of glasses caught in the goo. Did someone melt? That mystery is what makes it so effective. All of Jacobus's early sketches stuck with the same basic idea, stairs plus slime, just from different angles. Sometimes simple really is best. The reprint tried to jazz it up by turning monster blood into more of a full-on blob creature, which makes sense given the story's blob-inspired roots, but it loses a little of that ominous what the hell happened here vibe. International covers went in some pretty wild directions. The UK version went literal with a bucket of monster blood, but for some reason the ooze has a jack-o'-lantern face carved into it. France added a cat cautiously making its way down some slime-covered stairs. Fingers crossed the poor thing didn't get sucked in. Italy got fancy with a reprint that looked like it came bundled with an actual bottle of monster blood. The Dutch went for variety. One cover shows what looks like a lunch lady that was cooking up something green and nasty, and another has kids being offered monster blood by a creepy hand, while a cat leaps dramatically through a broken window? I have no idea what's going on with that one. Vietnam's cover plays it straight, showing monster blood actually attacking a person, which is awesome. Indonesia, in true form, went abstract again with their signature fart clouds, and making the slime look like something else entirely. And then South Korea brought the horror full circle by turning monster blood into a giant blob monster, with what looks like a decomposing child trapped inside. There are a ton of fun versions here, but the Jacobus original wins hands down. It's eerie, it's mysterious, and perfectly captures that what the hell is this stuff energy that made monster blood so iconic. Say Cheese and Die is a GOAT tier Goosebumps, no question. The concept is so simple yet so creepy. A perfectly normal family barbecue, except everyone is a skeleton. It's such a striking image and honestly one of the best examples of how Jacobus can make the mundane horrifying. Compared to its sequel, which leaned cartoony, this original is untouchable. It also marks the debut of Jacobus's beloved Converse shoes, which would pop up in several later covers. Fun fact, but this cover was never actually in the story. Scholastic loved it so much, they made R.L. Stine go back and add a dream sequence just so the art would make sense. The reprint went a different direction, showing a skull reflected in the lens of the cursed camera, which works fine but doesn't have the same punch of the skeleton cookout. The UK got weird with a camera that literally has a mouth spitting out cursed photos. France's original cover is even stranger, with a creepy tall man straight out of Phantasm menacing a kid photographer. Their reprint stepped it up though, with a blood-soaked Polaroid camera spitting out a very haunted looking photo. Honestly, it kinda looks like the thumbnail I made for the X-Files episode on Rue. Italy delivered a menacing variation with eerie skulls glaring from photos. The Dutch, on the other hand, kept it low stakes with a girl photographing a boy, whose cursed image makes him look like he fell over and scraped his nose. Not exactly nightmare fuel. South Korea had a really nice stylized design with a Polaroid developing a ghostly image. and Japan basically did a supercharged version of Jacobus's original. The skeletons are even more realistic, and ghostly spirits float ominously around them. It's haunting and gorgeous. But as good as those are, Jacobus's Barbecue from Hell still reigns supreme. It's clever, iconic, and one of the first Goosebumps covers that really burned itself into the minds of 90s kids. Scarecrows are already creepy by design, and Jacobus knew exactly how to lean into that with this cover. We've got the Scarecrow standing guard in a moonlit cornfield, just radiating menace. The atmosphere is perfect. You can practically hear the wind rustling the corn stalks, and the faint creak of straw shifting as it watches. Watching what though? A lost traveler? A victim? Or maybe a runaway girl who's a little too into her Scarecrow? Oh wait, wrong franchise, that's Tales from the Crypt. My one nitpick though, the eyes. Personally, I think blank, soulless eyes would have been creepier. In fact, Jacobus actually tried that in an early design, but Scholastic probably wanted kids to know the Scarecrow was alive, hence the glowing pupils. The reprint, however, gave the Scarecrow a jack-o'-lantern head, and honestly, I love that change. Scarecrows and pumpkins are Halloween royalty, so I'm all for it. The UK kept it on brand with, shocker, a scarecrow rising out of slime. The French cover features a very angry-looking Scarecrow, and of course he's angry, his head is on fire. Just watch out for his heat vision though, I hear it's a real scorcher. Indonesia switched things up with a surprisingly fart cloud-free design, and even gave us a moody, abstract watercolor version that's kinda striking. But the real winner? South Korea. Their version is nightmare fuel. Glowing red eyes, ominous moonlight, and a Scarecrow that looks like it's about to climb off the page and hunt you down? Sorry, Mr. Jacobus, but Korea might have taken the crown here. You can't scare me. Well, actually you can. I remember reading this late at night in my bedroom, imagining these mud monsters crawling across the floor to get me. The cover didn't help either, it only amplified the terror. Jacobus's Mudmen are classic Goosebumps monsters. Whereas he usually leans heavily on blues and purples to set a spooky mood, here he went with earthy oranges and browns that made the creatures feel slimy and grounded in the dirt they came from. The expression on the Mudman reaching for his victim is perfect, and hilariously, it's Jacobus himself. He took the reference photos of himself striking these poses, and you can tell he had fun embodying the creature. Early sketches explored a few different perspectives, but the final composition strikes the ideal balance of menacing and believable. The reprint tries to ramp up the monster's menace even more, but I honestly prefer the more subdued, restrained terror of the original. The UK cover swapped out the mud monsters for floating kid faces and hands emerging from the slime. Not terrible, just kind of boring. The Korean edition went wild, turning the Mudman into something that looks covered in eyeballs, or like a severely burned person. Definitely creepy, but it loses the grounded horror Jacobus nailed so well. At the end of the day, the original Jacobus cover is untouchable. It's mud, menace, and pure childhood nightmares all rolled into one. One Day at Horrorland is pure iconic Goosebumps. As a kid, I would have done anything to visit a place like this. Seriously, anything. A theme park where chaos reigns and bodies might be everywhere? Sign me up! Cautiously. The cover itself sets the tone perfectly. The Horrorland sign drips like blood, claw marks score the letters, and a demonic creature peers ominously from the top. Deep blues and purples dominate the scene, with hints of orange suggesting night is falling. Off in the distance you can see the park itself, either filled with the screams of excited kids or frantic chaos. Hard to tell which, and that's the point. Early sketches focused on gates or rides, but the final cover is far more foreboding, capturing the sinister energy of the park rather than just the spectacle. The reprint cover is cute, I guess, but it just doesn't scream Horrorland. A monster ice cream man is just a little too silly when you compare it to Jacobus's original design. The French cover goes grandiose, showing a massive bestial monster looming over the park. Think King Kong with like a goat head? And the updated French version simplifies it with a more standard Welcome to Horrorland sign. The Dutch cover adds its own flair with a reptilian monster and some kids that look like they're very high, while Vietnam opts for a lone bike in front of the park, ominous in its subtlety. Korea, on the other hand, takes the silliest approach yet, with a green goblin-like monster and a cartoonishly chaotic crowd. Even with all these interpretations, Jacobus's original is the one that nails the balance of wonder, terror, and pure Goosebumps energy. Welcome to Dead House is the book that practically defines Goosebumps' spooky vibe. Being the first book in the series, it carries that sense of introduction, not just to the franchise, but to the kind of chill-inducing thrills readers would come to expect. Jacobus's cover is perfection in simplicity and mood. The creepy old house dominates the scene, framed by a dead tree and a slightly open door glowing faintly orange. Peering from one of the windows is an ominous figure, hinting at the horrors that await inside. An early sketch experimented with an angled perspective showing the mystery figure from a second floor window, but the final design hits that classic balance of suspense and eeriness. Interestingly, the artwork bears some resemblance to the 1988 novel Deadly Impulse, for which Jacobus also did the cover art. Fun fact, but George A. Romero even wrote a concept for a film adaptation at one point, but unfortunately it just never came to fruition, although by the 90s Romero's best days were arguably behind him. The reprint takes Jacobus' original idea and gives it a slightly more cartoonish spin, but the mood is softened. The UK cover strips it down to a skull and gravestones, while France's version ups the creep factor with a young girl in a cemetery being reached for by skeletal hands. Their updated French version goes a little more cartoony, showing the girl in what looks to be a possessed state. Denmark offers a sketchy, ghostly figure in a window with a crow perched nearby, and the Dutch add their usual emotionless townsfolk and spooky shadow play. South Korea opts for a young girl running toward the haunted house, rendered in grayscale with hints of purple, giving it a beautifully eerie look. Japan really goes all out. The house is engulfed in ghostly energy, and the sky and clouds are designed in a way that makes them feel alive, like extensions of the horror itself. Yet, despite all these impressive international takes, Jacobus' original remains unmatched. There's just a warmth in that cover, a mix of nostalgia and suspense that still hits just right. The Werewolf of Fever Swamp isn't just a standout in the Goosebumps series, it's one of my personal favorites, both for story and artwork. There's just something timeless about a werewolf, and Jacobus' depiction nails the classic horror vibe while keeping it grounded in realism. The cover shows a wolf howling at the moon, framed by the swampy brush and murky green water below. The torn clothing of the former kid turned werewolf adds just enough narrative detail without overwhelming the composition. Early sketches experimented with the wolf boy standing on its hind legs or wearing more clothing, but the simplicity of the final version, a naturalistic wolf in its element, is what makes it so iconic. Unfortunately, the reprint does not capture that magic. The pose and proportions of the werewolf feel off, robbing it of the original's tension and drama. Internationally, the UK cover goes for a wolf-boy combo, while France features a massive wolf looming over a child, emphasizing the threat. The Dutch versions include one playful take with a wolf pawing at a child like it wants a treat, and another that's basically a photo of a wolf with the moon placed in front of it. Indonesia offers an abstract version that transforms the wolf into something almost elegant rather than terrifying. And South Korea seems to have let creativity run wild with a chaotic, kid-drawn aesthetic. Despite all these variations, nothing beats the original. The combination of atmosphere, simplicity, and classic monster energy makes it a cover that's instantly memorable and endlessly spooky. The Haunted Mask isn't just the first on this list, it's my absolute favorite Goosebumps book, my favorite episode of the show, and my favorite piece of artwork. Its brilliance lies in its terrifying simplicity. A young girl holding up a horrifying mask in front of her face. There's nothing overcomplicated here. Jacobus uses his signature dark blues and purples to convey a moody, chilling energy, while the green mask, glowing eyes, and drooling mouth bring an intensity that makes the cover genuinely frightening. This is simplicity perfected. Jacobus enlisted the help of his niece, who held up an old Halloween mask her father owned, as a reference to craft one of the most iconic Goosebumps covers ever. Early sketches explored slight variations, but the final choice nailed the perfect balance of horror and focus. The reprint cover, however, misses the mark, showing Carly Beth scaring trick-or-treaters, which dilutes the horror. The UK cover gives the mask an almost reptilian or Godzilla Jr. look, while the first French cover adds a gauntness to the mask, but keeps a spooky Halloween vibe with the eerie black and orange neighborhood. Later French versions started leaning towards silliness, with the reprint veering fully into a comic book style reminiscent of The Mask. Other international takes vary wildly. The Danish version is bright and simple, showing Carly Beth removing the mask. The Dutch cover gives a rear view with kids reacting like, "So that's it, eh?" Indonesia opts for a bizarre goblin-like mask with a spider. Vietnam goes full horror, depicting what almost looks like a skinned face with Carly Beth trapped inside. And South Korea delivers an abstract, crudely drawn version with ghostly entities reaching for her. Despite all these inventive interpretations, nothing surpasses the original. The Haunted Masks cover remains a masterclass in fear and restraint, a timeless image that perfectly encapsulates the terror of Goosebumps. And that's every Goosebumps cover ranked from my least favorite to my favorite. Though honestly, the rankings don't really matter. The real point of this video was just to celebrate these amazing pieces of art, and maybe check out a few more from around the world. But I have to ask, what are some of your favorites? Do you have any fond memories like I did staring at these covers as a kid? Let me know down in the comments. If you want more Goosebumps content, I have a video poking fun at the silliness of the Haunted Mask right here. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the start of spooky season. Take care of yourself, and as always, stay spooky.